14 years of my life were buried inside Summit's server scripts, layered on top of scripts. Patches stacked like bricks. Diagrams sketched in notebooks stained with coffee rings. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud. But when the company's gears turned smoothly, it was because I had oiled them. For every 5-star review, every on-time delivery, my name hid in the background of a report nobody read twice. That Friday evening, as the office thinned and the hum of keyboards gave way to the low buzz of the janitor's vacuum, my inbox pinged. A Fortune 100 client had written in, praising the stability of our fulfillment dashboard. They called it seamless, a standard for the industry. My chest tightened, not with pride, but with relief. 14 years of vigilance, and still no collapse. I allowed myself one deep breath, the kind you take when you've kept the whole building upright by sheer will. By the time the memo circulated across the company, my name was gone. In its place, Gareth Lowell. He'd been COO for less than 3 weeks, but already his signature cologne drifted through the open-plan floor like he owned the air. He walked with a salesman's grin and polished loafers that squeaked on tile, tossing words like scalability and efficiencies as if they were herbs sprinkled over a salad. People laughed too loudly at his jokes. I watched from my cubicle, hand curled around a mug of tea that had gone cold hours earlier. No one said my name. No one corrected him. The credit slid neatly into his pocket while I sat invisible in mine. I forced a smile, the kind that keeps the peace. But inside, I felt the first crack of something I couldn't tape back together. I closed my laptop slowly, wiped the surface with a napkin as if the ritual could steady me. The office lights dimmed to weekend mode, and Gareth's voice carried one last time down the hallway, promising radical change. I tucked my notebooks into my bag, the diagrams of dependencies and fail-safes that only I could read, and walked toward the elevator knowing this was only the beginning of what he planned. Monday morning. Gareth summoned the entire staff to the atrium. Rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift stage where he stood, sleeves rolled to his elbows like he had just built something with his bare hands. I took my usual seat in the back, a cup of black tea balanced between my palms. The scent of burnt coffee floated through the air, but the tension was sharper. He started with buzzwords: streamlining, efficiency, future-proofing. Every syllable was followed by an exaggerated pause, as if he expected applause. The slides behind him showed charts no one recognized, but his voice filled the gaps. He announced the outsourcing of IT triage to a contractor in another state, the installation of a chatbot to handle support, and the immediate dismissal of 2 senior analysts who had trained half the room. Their names disappeared in seconds, their faces already forgotten in the silence that followed. I looked around, shoulders stiffened, eyes darted downward. People avoided looking at me, as though I carried the same infection that had claimed the analysts. Next to me, Brandon Keyes shifted in his seat. He was young, barely 3 years out of school, still too eager to hide his nerves. He leaned closer, whispering through clenched teeth, "He's clearing house." I didn't respond. My pen moved steadily across the notebook in my lap, recording every announcement, cuts, mergers, replacements, each line another red flag in a growing parade. Gareth's smirk told us everything. He wasn't here to strengthen what worked. He was here to dismantle, to leave his mark like graffiti sprayed across a building he didn't own. The meeting ended with forced claps that echoed awkwardly. Gareth left the stage confident, convinced his words had inspired. I closed my notebook, slid the pen into the spiral, and sipped the last of my tea. Silence was the only armor I had left, and if I had learned anything in 14 years, it was that silence could be sharper than steel when wielded at the right moment. I walked back to my desk, notebook pressed against my side. Already bracing for the next strike he was preparing to deliver. It started with a whisper from operations about a hiccup in Dallas. A routine sync delay, nothing catastrophic. Already logged and resolved before the morning stand-up. I had written the ticket myself, annotated it with the rollback contingency, and even attached the reroute log for transparency. To me, it was closed before it had even become a problem. To Gareth, it was ammunition. I heard him before I saw him. His voice cut through the open floor like a blade sharp, loud, deliberate. A stack of papers slapped against the edge of my cubicle as he appeared, waving printouts of outdated error logs like a verdict. "You're fired, clear your desk." The air went still. The clatter of keyboards stopped. Even the HVAC seemed to hold its breath. Dozens of eyes flicked in my direction, then quickly down again. Nobody wanted to be caught watching an execution. I stayed seated, my hand still resting on the keyboard. Calmly, I gave the ticket number, issue 76435, logged, annotated, and closed. The sync was resolved at 9 to 12 yesterday. My voice was steady, but my chest throbbed like a drum. "Excuses don't move freight," he snapped, cutting me off before I could continue. His words cracked across the room like a whip. I saw Brandon 2 rows over, his knuckles white around a pen, lips pressed into a hard line. He looked ready to stand, but stayed rooted, powerless. The sting wasn't just the firing, it was the silence of everyone else. 14 years of stability, 14 years of invisible labor, and not one voice rose to defend me. My hands moved automatically, sliding my 2 worn notebooks filled with diagrams, dependencies, handwritten keys into my bag. I left the company-issued thumb drive in the drawer. It was useless without me anyway. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, the weight of 14 years settling across my shoulders. Gareth stood tall, pleased with his spectacle, the conqueror of a system he didn't even understand. I looked at him once. Not long enough to challenge, only long enough to recognize the hollow victory in his smirk. Then I turned, my bag against my side, and walked toward the terminal I knew would be my final stop. I paused at my terminal, the glow of the screen reflecting off the silver edge of my mug. My hands moved without hesitation, years of repetition guiding each click. Hidden in the corner of my desktop sat a small teal square labeled Failsafe Protocol. To anyone else, it looked like a maintenance script, just another utility buried under layers of directories. To me, it was the culmination of long nights and quiet foresight. I double-clicked. A black window flickered open, cursor blinking like a held breath. The prompt appeared, "Run Final Protocol." My finger hovered only a moment before pressing enter. No alarms, no dramatic countdown, no cinematic collapse. Just silence. On the surface, the system continued to hum, but every command function was now sealed behind a gate only I could open. Without the handshake key, they could shout at the machine all they wanted. It would nod politely and refuse to move. Behind me, Gareth strutted away, triumphant in his performance. He didn't notice the change, didn't notice me closing my SQL shell, or the faint line of code that had already rewritten the rules. To him, I was finished. To the system, I was the only one left. A junior HR rep appeared with a clipboard, her voice trembling with rehearsed authority. "We'll need your signature and badge." I signed quickly, slid the plastic rectangle across her palm, and watched her disappear as if I were already erased. I slipped my notebook's faded covers stuffed with hand-drawn maps and dependency chains into my tote. 14 years of living memory now reduced to scribbles only I could interpret. The rest, the true backbone of Summit's empire, was buried under encryption deep inside the system, waiting. Outside, the Seattle sky had broken into rain, thin drops streaking the glass doors as I stepped out. The cold hit my face, sharp and clean. Washing away the staleness of recycled office air, I pulled up my hood, tightened my grip on the tote, and walked toward the parking garage. By the time I started my car and pointed it south toward my cabin on an Oregon lake, my heart was pounding, but steady enough to know I had done exactly what I needed. Saturday morning unfolded in layers of gray. Mist drifted low across the surface of the lake, curling like breath against the glass of my cabin window. For the first time in years, I didn't open my laptop at dawn. I brewed a pot of coffee, laced my boots, and set off down the cedar trail behind the house. The ground was slick, the air cold enough to sting, but each step loosened a weight I'd carried too long. My lungs burned, my knees protested, yet the ache felt alive, not exhausting. By midday, I was sitting on a fallen log, sipping from a thermos while the world stayed quiet. No dashboards demanding attention, no midnight alerts, just the sound of water dripping from branches and the occasional knock of a woodpecker. The silence felt foreign, like a gift I wasn't sure I deserved. That night, my phone buzzed on the counter. A number I didn't recognize flashed once, twice, before I opened the message. He's firing more. Says he'll replace all seniors by Q3. No signature, but I knew the voice behind the words. Brandon. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting it face down. The choice wasn't mine anymore. I had no duty to warn them, no reason to step back into fire I hadn't lit. Meanwhile, across the country, the edges of the system were already fraying. In Chicago, the fulfillment dashboard dragged 6 hours behind reality. Managers blamed VPN latency, Comcast outages, even the weather. Tickets piled up. Orders sat unshipped, tagged as pending in warehouses that swore they were cleared. Nobody suspected the core. Not yet. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the porch, and let the steady rhythm of rain against the gutter drown out the world. The machine I had built still ran, but I knew the difference between a hum of health and the rattle of something bleeding beneath the surface. By 8 o'clock Monday morning, the cracks had widened into canyons. Dallas reported inventory counts that didn't match shipments. Phoenix flagged deliveries duplicated twice, and Cincinnati's logs showed stock vanishing from shelves without ever leaving the warehouse. Support tickets stacked like sandbags against a flood, each one another leak in a system no one could see clearly. I imagined the war room in Seattle, screens glowing with false assurance, dashboards cheerfully displaying all systems operational. Behind the numbers, the machine groaned. Orders slipped through gaps, labels misprinted, barcodes that should have matched to pallets now belonged to air. Gareth stormed into the room, red creeping up his neck. His voice carried down hallways, demanding answers nobody could give. Consultants dialed in from New York, throwing commands at servers they didn't understand. Reboots rolled across clusters like tremors, shaking already fragile structures. Instead of repair, they sowed more chaos. In Spokane, a warehouse manager tried to override the queue manually. One keystroke triggered a recall of one of 400 outdoor generators, August stock-marked for winter sales. Trucks scheduled for outbound deliveries turned around empty, while returns they couldn't process stacked on docks. Finance ran projections before lunch. $1.2 million evaporated in less than 4 hours. Managers huddled, sweating through collars, whispering names they didn't dare say aloud. I knew mine must have been hovering like smoke above the table. Still, Gareth's voice thundered with defiance. He refused to let it pass his lips. To admit my absence mattered would puncture the armor of pride he wore like a badge. He barked at IT to escalate again, as though volume could substitute for knowledge. From my cabin porch, I sipped coffee and watched clouds shift across the lake. The system was doing exactly what I had designed it to, humming on the surface, waiting beneath. Each misstep above added weight to Gareth's shoulders, and still he pressed forward, blind to the collapse already underway. By Tuesday morning, the numbers were bleeding faster than they could count. Finance tallied $6 million in confirmed losses, with projections climbing by the hour. Support lines burned hot. Clients demanded answers. And then came the threat that made everyone's stomachs drop. A Fortune 100 partner announced they would cancel a $50 million contract if real-time updates weren't restored within 24 hours. The board scrambled. Directors who rarely left glass towers flew in overnight, their faces drawn, voices sharp with panic. Gareth tried to keep control, barking orders in the war room, pacing like a caged animal, but nobody listened anymore. Fear had shifted their loyalty. By mid-morning, a new presence arrived, Ezra Vale, a consultant with a reputation for untangling digital catastrophes. He carried no entourage, no slick presentation, just a laptop and a confidence that silenced the room. For 45 minutes, he typed, brows furrowed, scanning logs and tracing threads through a maze only I could map. The executives watched like supplicants at a ritual, waiting for a verdict. Then he smirked, closed the laptop halfway. "This system isn't broken," he said, his voice even. "It's waiting." Confusion rippled through the war room. Someone asked if it was sabotage. Ezra shook his head. "You don't have a system problem. You have a Clara problem." My name settled like dust after an explosion. Silence stretched, heavy, undeniable. Brandon, seated near the corner, leaned forward and whispered into the stunned air. She built the handshake. All eyes shifted to Gareth. His face flamed scarlet, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. "We are not crawling back," he growled, his pride louder than reason. The directors said nothing, but their silence spoke louder than his protest. They knew the truth now. Every dollar vanishing. Every error compounding it all, traced back to one decision. One name they'd erased too quickly. By the end of that meeting, I was no longer a ghost. I was the key they couldn't reach, the hand they'd slapped away when they needed it most. The email arrived late Tuesday night. Subject line glowing with desperation disguised as enthusiasm. Exciting consulting opportunity at Summit Logistics Systems. I almost laughed. The same HR rep who had handed me a clipboard 2 days earlier now wrote with syrupy phrases about my unique expertise and mission-critical leadership memory. Not a single word about being paraded out of the building in front of everyone. I didn't bother drafting a response myself. I forwarded it to my attorney, Diane Burnside, with a short note, triple my old rate, paid up front, remote, no Gareth. Diane knew my style clean, decisive, sharp. She filled in the rest, indemnity clauses, liability waivers, and a line item for reputation restoration if they ever tried to spin this as a collaboration rather than damage control. By sunrise Wednesday, Diane called. "They've caved," she said. Voice dry as always. "Payment will hit your account before noon." True enough. At 11:47 a.m., I refreshed my banking app and watched $87,000 land like a quiet thunderclap. It wasn't about the money, but watching numbers move in my favor for once felt like justice. The second decision was mine alone, who would act as my point of contact. I didn't hesitate. I typed a message to Brandon Keyes. "Need read-write access to production plus rollback privileges. You'll be my liaison. No one else. Do not argue." His reply came in 4 minutes flat. "Understood. Access restored. I'll stay out of your way. Thank you. I'm sorry." I didn't answer. Apologies weren't what I wanted. What mattered was that for the first time in 14 years, I set the terms. They didn't own me, didn't even employ me. I wasn't returning as staff, chained to badge swipes and performance reviews. I was coming back as the architect, the ghost they'd dismissed, now dictating every rule of engagement. The system was waiting, and I was the only one who knew how to wake it. I waited until the sun dipped low behind the pines. The lake outside my cabin turning the color of tarnished silver. My laptop glowed against the wooden table, the cursor blinking as if it had been holding its breath for me. I tunneled into Summit's network through my private VPN, bypassing layers they had long forgotten existed. Directories unfolded like secret hallways only I knew how to walk. At the prompt, I typed in the 4-line script I had written years earlier. Each keystroke felt like pulling a hidden lever. The system hesitated for a heartbeat, then responded with the quiet obedience of an old friend. Logs scrolled, caches purged, queues realigned. 48 seconds later, the entire machine exhaled. Backlogs flushed. Orders moved. Dashboards flicked from red to yellow to a steady green glow. Across the country, in the Seattle war room, I could almost hear the gasp ripple through the executives. Their screens lit up as though Christmas had arrived uninvited. Ezra Vale, arms folded, leaned against the wall and muttered under his breath. Elegant, obscure, brilliant. Brandon messaged me in Slack the moment it happened. A single screenshot of the war room's live dashboard now stable. Below it, he typed nothing. I sent back just 3 words I do now. He showed Gareth. Witnesses would later describe Gareth's face as drained, lips moving without sound, like a man trying to summon excuses in a language he never learned. The board members around him didn't need explanations anymore. They weren't staring at the system. They were staring at the truth of who controlled it. I leaned back in my chair, coffee cooling beside me, watching numbers scroll steady and true. They thought firing me erased my worth. Instead, it had carved it into stone. I wasn't replaceable. I wasn't expendable. I was the system they had built their empire on, and now they all knew it. I closed the terminal softly, leaving the connection alive, and prepared myself for the fallout I knew would come next. By Friday, the numbers finally leveled. Dashboards held steady. Shipments flowed without interruption, and the panic softened into exhausted relief. Finance delivered their verdict in black and white, 17.8 million gone in less than a week. The losses were undeniable, and so was the blame. The board moved swiftly. Gareth Lowell was reassigned to strategic partnerships, a title polished enough to mask what it really was: corporate exile. His office emptied overnight, his name scrubbed from the leadership roster as though he had never existed. No speeches, no farewell gathering, just a closed door and a cardboard box. HR followed with a memo blasted to every inbox: value internal expertise. Protect core knowledge. Invest in people who keep the foundation strong. 2 short paragraphs, stripped of sincerity, but I knew whose shadow sat beneath each word. I read it from my porch in Oregon, a glass of red wine balanced on the arm of my chair, the breeze off the lake carrying the scent of pine. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The justice wasn't in their punishment, but in the quiet I had carved for myself. Offers began to arrive that week, each one heavier than the last 6-figure bases. Equity shares, titles with words like principal and chief. Companies that had once overlooked me now scrambled to attach their name to mine. I skimmed them without urgency, closing my laptop as the sun dipped low, the ripples on the lake catching fire in the fading light. For once, the decision belonged only to me. No executive barking orders, no consultant deciding worth, no performance review weighing invisible labor. Just my choice, on my terms. Summit might continue running, but everyone there knew the truth now. They hadn't just fired an employee, they had fired their systems architect, and they had learned the price. I finished the last sip of wine, set the glass down, and leaned back into the evening air, content in the knowledge that survival now carried my signature, not theirs.